Mornings always start the same way. I wake up at 6 sharp, even without an alarm clock, a habit developed over years of teaching. I lie still for a while, listening to Miriam's quiet, intermittent breathing. Every morning I pray to hear that breath again. Miriam sleeps turned on her right side, the only position she's comfortable in right now. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. 3 months ago, the doctor said 6 months to go, maybe less. I get up carefully, trying not to squeak the bed. There are 2 beds in our bedroom now. Miriam sleeps on one special medical mattress, and I sleep on the other. I carefully adjust the blanket, even though it's perfect. Miriam doesn't move much in her sleep. I leave the room, closing the door quietly. Our house in Grand Junction isn't that big, but it's big enough for Miriam and me. 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and a small study where my collection of historical books is kept. We bought it 30 years ago when I took a position as a history professor at a local college. Now the house is worth 3 times what we paid for it. Prestigious neighborhood, all that. In the kitchen, I make breakfast. Oatmeal with blueberries for me, a protein shake for Miriam, the only thing she can swallow right now. I put the kettle on, pull out the pill box with my wife's morning medication, 12 different pills. I put them in the right order. Nurse Lorna arrives at 8 to help Miriam with her morning treatments. By this time, I've managed to walk around the block. The only 15 minutes a day I get out of the house just for me. Lorna is the only person besides me that Miriam allows to attend to herself. I'm proud of my wife. Even now, she maintains her dignity. After Lorna leaves, Miriam and I have breakfast together in her room. I read her the news or a book. Right now, we're in the middle of Jane Eyre, her favorite novel. Miriam can't hold the book in her hands much longer. It's too heavy. "Humphrey, you don't have to read to me every day," she says in her quiet, weakened voice. "You must be bored." "You know I'm not," I reply, smiling. "For a literature professor, there's nothing better than rereading the classics. It's our little joke. I've always taught history, but Miriam likes to tease me that I've secretly always wanted to be a literature professor." The day goes on, medications, treatments, short walks around the house when Miriam is feeling a little better. Sometimes I turn on travel documentaries for her. We used to travel the world a lot. In the evening, the phone rings. It's our grandson, Whitmore. He says he's dropping by tomorrow with Prudence, his wife. I'm not too happy about the visit, but I don't let it get to me. "Of course, son. Miriam will be glad to see you." Actually, I'm not so sure about that. Miriam is exhausted by her illness, and socializing, even with loved ones, is taking its toll. But she'll never admit it. She's always been like that, putting the needs of others before her own. Whitmore and Prudence have been frequent visitors for the last 2 months. They used to show up a couple times a year at Christmas and Thanksgiving. Now they come every week. I'd be happy for the attention if I didn't notice them looking around the house, as if assessing the surroundings. Whitmore is the son of our daughter, Idris. She lives in Portland. We haven't spoken in almost 10 years. A family quarrel that eventually turned into a chasm between us. Whitmore is now 32. He works for some kind of technology company, though I've never figured out exactly what he does. Always avoiding a straight answer. His wife, Prudence, is 5 years younger. Works at an advertising agency. Or used to. She's at home now, I think. They've been married 4 years. No children. The next day they arrive at lunchtime, right on schedule. Prudence brings a store-bought salad and fruitcake. She knows I won't let her run the kitchen. "Grandpa Humphrey." Whitmore hugs me at the door with exaggerated enthusiasm. He smells of expensive cologne and a little alcohol. "How are you? How's Grandma?" "The same," I answer with restraint. "She's resting now. She's tired after her treatments." "Oh, that's okay." Prudence slips past me into the house. She's wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly pension. "We won't bother her. Just wanted to make sure you were okay." I notice her gaze sliding across the living room, lingering on the antique clock Miriam inherited from her grandmother. Last time she asked about their value. "Just wondering," she said then. We're sitting at the dining room table. I've made a simple lunch, chicken soup and sandwiches. Whitmore barely eats, only drinks the wine he brought. Prudence picks at her salad. "Grandfather," Whitmore begins after the second glass, "we've been thinking, it must be hard for you to manage all this on your own. It's a big house, and Grandma needs constant care. I manage, I answer briefly. We have a nurse who comes twice a day. Yes, but still, Prudence said, it's a strain. Maybe you should think about moving to a place where there is constant medical care. For both of us. I look at her, trying to figure out if she's really worried about us, or if she has other motives. Miriam wants to stay home, I say firmly, and I want to be here with her. Of course, Whitmore raises his hands in a conciliatory gesture. We're just offering options. By the way, I talked to my mom the other day. It takes me by surprise. He rarely mentions Idris when he talks to me. And how is she? She's fine. She says she'd like to come down, but she can't right now. Work, you know. I nod, though I don't believe a word of it. If Idris really wanted to come, nothing would stop her. That's the kind of character she has. She used to be anyway. After lunch, Whitmore asks if he can look at my office. Says he's interested in some old books I've collected over the years. He has never shown an interest in history or books in general before. In my office, he examines the shelves, but I notice his gaze lingers on the safe in the corner, where I keep important documents and some cash for emergencies. Impressive collection, Grandpa, he says without looking at the books. Must be worth a fortune. Only for a true history buff, I reply. The market value is small. That's a lie. Some of my first editions are indeed valuable, but Whitmore doesn't need to know that. That evening, just as they are about to leave, another unexpected guest appears. Prudence's mother, Eldora Quinlan, a tall, thin woman with perfectly styled gray hair and a face that seems to have a look of slight disapproval permanently fixed on it. Oh, Eldora, I try to hide my surprise. I didn't realize you were stopping by too. Thought I'd drop by and pick up the kids. She calls Whitmore and Prudence, though they're both in their 30s. How's Miriam? Resting, I answered briefly. I brought some herbal teas, Eldora handed me a bag. They say they help with, you know. I thank her even though I know Miriam won't be drinking any herbal teas. The doctors have severely restricted her diet. Eldora enters the house uninvited and, to my surprise, heads straight for the second floor. I'm just going to take a look at Miriam, she says over her shoulder. Don't worry. I follow, but Whitmore distracts me with a question about the electric bill. It's an absurd question, but I start to answer it. When I get upstairs, Eldora is already coming out of Miriam's room. Asleep, she says. I didn't want to wake her. By the way, Humphrey, have you considered moving her to another room? It's too small for a medical bed. Miriam wants to stay in our bedroom, I reply, feeling my irritation growing. Whatever you say, Eldora shrugs. Just trying to help. They finally leave, and the house falls into blessed silence. I check on Miriam. She is indeed asleep, but her sleep is restless. I sit down next to her, taking her fragile hand in mine. Sometimes I think I can see the life leaving her body drop by drop. A week later, the visits are repeated. Now Eldora comes with Whitmore and Prudence. She says she wants to help with Miriam's care, but I notice she's more interested in the house, asking about the heating system, when the roof was last replaced, examining the closets in the guest rooms. One evening, as I go down to the kitchen to get water for Miriam, I hear voices in the backyard. The window is ajar, and Whitmore and Prudence's voices are clearly audible in the silence. Mom says the house is worth at least $500,000, Prudence says, and that's not counting everything inside. Have you seen his book collection? It doesn't make any difference, Whitmore replies. What matters is that it's all ours after the old woman's gone. Grandpa won't last long alone, believe me. He can't go his whole life without her. But what if he wants to sell the house? Prudence sounds worried. He won't, Whitmore says firmly. Too many memories, and if anything, Oldor's mom knows a way to convince him that he needs help with his decisions. They laugh and I get a chill inside. I freeze, afraid to move and give away my presence. I never thought I'd be eavesdropping on my own grandson, but now I'm grateful for the opportunity. It's important to take your time, Prudence continued. Mom says you have to take it one step at a time. First convince him that he needs help, then offer to move, and then you can get a power of attorney to manage the property. Your mother is a genius, Whitmore says with admiration. How she pulled that off with your father. Quiet, Prudence cuts him off. Don't you ever speak of that, do you hear? They go farther into the garden, and I can't make out any more words. I'm standing in the kitchen, clutching the water glass so tightly I'm afraid I'll crush it. So that's how it is. They're waiting for Miriam to die so they can get to me. Maybe even speed up the process. I walk up to Miriam, trying to calm myself. She mustn't see my agitation. She has too little strength as it is. She's asleep, her breathing quiet but steady. I sit down beside her and look long at her face, gaunt with sickness, but still beautiful to me. Well, Whitmore, Prudence, and Aldora, you greatly underestimate the old history professor. I may have spent most of my life among books, but that doesn't mean I can't stand up for myself. Nor Miriam. It's time to take action. Time to find out what my loving relatives are really up to. The conversation I overheard kept me up all night. I lay sleepless in my bed, listening to Miriam's breathing and pondering what I had heard. After the old woman has withdrawn, these words burned me from the inside. They spoke of my Miriam, the woman with whom I had lived for 43 years, as a hindrance to my inheritance. And what did they mean about ways to convince me that I needed help making decisions? And what happened to Prudence's father? The morning Lorna came in, I decided to ask her about it. She's been working in our neighborhood for 15 years and knows almost everyone. Lorna, have you heard anything about Eldora Quinlan? I asked in between while she was taking Miriam's blood pressure. Lorna froze for a moment, then continued without looking at me. Dash Mrs. Quinlan? Yes, of course. She's the mother of Prudence, your grandson's wife, isn't she? Yes. It just seemed to me that she was taking too much interest in our house. Lorna finished with the pressure and turned to me. Mr. Blackthorne, I shouldn't be discussing other patients and their families, but she lowered her voice, though we were alone in the room, not counting Miriam, who was half asleep. Be careful with her. Her husband, Mr. Quinlan, died 3 years ago under strange circumstances. He was no sicker than any other man of 70, and then all of a sudden there was a sharp deterioration, and in a month he was gone. What do you mean? I felt a chill run down my spine. Nothing specific, Lorna answered quickly, just rumors. But it's known that after he died, Mrs. Quinlan got a good insurance policy and a house, and before he died, he suddenly changed his will. She was quiet for a moment. And there's one more thing. I heard that your grandson owed a large sum of money to some not-so-nice people. That confirmed my suspicions, but I didn't want to drag Lorna into our family problems. Thank you, Lorna. I appreciate your candor. After she left, I kissed Miriam on the forehead. She'd fallen asleep again after her treatments and went down to my office. It was time to start my own investigation. The first thing I did was check my collection. One by one, I examined the most valuable copies. Fortunately, all the books were there. Then I opened the desk drawer where I kept the family jewelry. Miriam's mother's antique diamond bracelet, which we had decided to leave to our daughter Idris, was in place. But the sapphire ring I had intended to give Miriam for our 45th wedding anniversary was gone. I remembered exactly that it had been here a month ago when I pulled out the deeds to the house. The deeds. I quickly checked the folder of important papers. Everything was in place, but it seemed to me that some sheets were not in the order I had left them. Of course, at my age, one could forget such trifles. But years of working with historical documents had taught me neatness and attention to detail. Just in case, I decided to make copies of all the important documents. I took out an old camera I used to document historical artifacts during expeditions and photographed every page. Then transferred the photos to my computer and copied them to a flash drive that I hid in a stash behind the books. After that, I checked the mail. Among the usual bills and sales brochures, I found a strange envelope with no return address. Inside was a letter from the law firm Price & Associates asking me to confirm my intention to retitle the house. What the hell was this? I had never contacted this firm and certainly had no intention of retitling the house. I called the number listed in the letter. After a few rings, a young female voice answered. Price & Associates, how can I help you? My name is Humphrey Blackthorne. I received a letter from your firm about remortgaging my house, but I have never contacted you. There was a pause on the other end of the line. One moment, Mr. Blackthorne. I'll check the information. I waited, nervously tapping my fingers on the desk. Mr. Blackthorne? The secretary's voice came back. Our records show that your grandson, Whitmore Pierce, approached us on your behalf. He has power of attorney. What power of attorney? I felt anger rising up inside of me. I never gave him power of attorney. Pause again. Sir, we have a copy of the document. It was notarized 2 weeks ago. But if you're saying you didn't sign it, perhaps you should go to the police. Thank you. That's exactly what I'll do. I hung up the phone, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. A power of attorney? Forging my signature? This isn't just a family squabble anymore. It's a real crime. But before going to the police, I needed to gather more evidence. I decided to check the computer. Although I'm an old-school man who prefers paper books, I know how to use the internet. I typed in Aldora Quinlan's name and her late husband, Sebastian. Found several articles in the local paper. One about Sebastian's death, a standard obituary, nothing unusual. Another, more interesting, dated a month before his death, about a fundraiser, mentioning that well-known local philanthropist Sebastian Quinlan recently changed the primary beneficiary of his charitable foundation from the city hospital to a private mental health clinic. And a third article, published 6 months after his death, mentioned in passing that the late Sebastian Quinlan's widow, Aldora, has sold most of her husband's assets, including a controlling interest in his construction company. The picture was starting to become clearer. It seemed Aldora was experienced in manipulating the assets of elderly relatives. And now she, along with her daughter and my grandson, was targeting our house. But suspicion wasn't enough. I needed hard evidence. I decided to install hidden cameras and voice recorders in the house. It sounds paranoid, but the situation demanded it. That same day, I went to the electronics store, telling Miriam that I needed to buy a new reading lamp. At the store, I picked out a compact digital voice recorder with plenty of memory and a feature to activate recording when sound is detected, as well as 2 miniature cameras disguised as common household items, a watch and a photo frame. When I got home, Miriam was asleep. I quickly set up the devices, a voice recorder under the dining room table, one camera disguised as a clock in the living room, another as a picture frame in the study. They were all wireless and recorded on built-in memory, so I didn't have to worry about connecting to a computer. The next day, Whitmore called to say he'd be stopping by tonight, alone without Prudence. This was unusual. They usually came together. I sensed he was up to something, and I was ready. Whitmore showed up around 7 with a bottle of expensive whiskey. "Grandfather!" He hugged me with exaggerated enthusiasm. "How are you? How is grandmother?" "Miriam is resting," I replied. "It's been a hard day." I understand," he nodded with fake sympathy. "How about a drink? I brought some excellent whiskey." I agreed, and we went into the living room. Whitmore immediately poured himself a full glass and took a big gulp. "Grandfather, I wanted to talk to you about something important," he began after the second glass. "I'm listening." I pretended to drink, but only wet my lips. "You know I've always admired this house." He pointed around the room. "I have so many memories of it." "Yes, it's a special house," I agreed neutrally. "So, I was thinking," Whitmore stepped forward, "what if I bought it from you? Right now, at a good price." I almost choked. "Bought the house? Why?" "Well, it's too big for the two of you, especially under the circumstances. Prudence and I are thinking about expanding our family." He smiled falsely. "You could move into a nice apartment closer to the medical center. It would be more convenient for Grandma." "Whitmore," I tried to speak calmly. "Miriam and I have no intention of selling the house. Not now. Not in the future." His face contorted for a moment, but he quickly pulled himself together. Of course. It was just a suggestion. I thought you might need money for medical treatment." "We're fine," I cut him off. The rest of the evening passed in strained conversation. Whitmore tried to find out how much we had set aside for Miriam's treatment, how things were going with the will, whether I was thinking of taking out long-term care insurance. I answered evasively, pretending not to understand what he was getting at. When he finally left, I immediately checked the recorder and camera footage. And for good reason. The camera in my office recorded Whitmore's quick search of my desk drawers when I went to answer Lorna's call. And the tape recorder showed him calling someone from the living room while I was in the kitchen. "Yes, I'm at my grandfather's," he said in a muffled voice. "No, he wouldn't sell it. Stubborn old man. Yes, I know the debt has to be paid back by the end of the month. I'm working on it. Look, just give me a little more time." After Grandma dies, it'll all be ours, I swear. What? No, I don't think he suspects anything. He's as gullible as a child. So much for gullible. I turned off the tape, feeling a mixture of anger and bitter satisfaction. Now I had proof that Whitmore was really after our property, and judging from the conversation, he owed someone big time. The next day I made two important calls. The first was to Holland and Associates, a law firm unrelated to the one mentioned in the letter. I made an appointment with an attorney specializing in family law and elder law defense. The second call was to an old friend, Garrett Thompson, who used to be a police officer and now owned a private detective agency. Garrett, I need your help, I said when he answered, and complete confidentiality. Anything for you, Humphrey. What's up? I briefly explained the situation without going into detail over the phone. I need to know where my grandson stands financially, and whether he or his wife has a criminal record. Understood, Garrett replied seriously. I'll get right on it. Give me a few days. 3 days later, when Whitmore, Prudence, and Aldora showed up to visit us again, I was ready. The recorder and cameras were in place, fully charged and activated. They came in time for lunch as usual. Aldora brought some sort of elaborate salad and a bottle of expensive wine. Prudence immediately went upstairs to check on Grandma, though Miriam was asleep at that point after taking morphine, and I asked not to disturb her. While Aldora kept me busy in the kitchen, asking about Miriam's condition and wondering in between if I'd updated my will since her diagnosis, Whitmore disappeared. I purposely didn't stop him, knowing that the cameras would record everything he would do. Lunch passed in a tense atmosphere. I noticed that Prudence and Whitmore exchanged a few odd glances, and Aldora was unusually gracious. Humphrey, I was thinking, she said, putting on her salad. Perhaps you should think about moving into a nursing home after, you know. She paused as if choosing her words. After Miriam's gone. I prefer not to discuss it, I replied coldly. Of course, she said hurriedly. I'm just trying to help. You know, at your age, living alone, it can be dangerous, especially with your memory problems. I almost choked. I beg your pardon? Well, Whitmore told me that you sometimes forget things. Important things. She cast a quick glance at her grandson. Like what? I tried to make my voice sound confused, not indignant. Like signing Whitmore's power of attorney, or that they'd agreed to consider selling the house? Aldora smiled with fake concern. It's normal, Humphrey. It happens at your age. It was clear now. They were preparing the ground to declare me incompetent. Classic scheme. Make people believe an elderly person is losing their memory, then take control of their estate for their own good. I never signed any power of attorney, I said firmly. And I never agreed to sell the house. See? Aldora looked meaningfully at Whitmore and Prudence. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You've forgotten. I realized it was useless to argue. The more I denied it, the more I would look like a confused old man who couldn't remember his own actions. Maybe you're right, I said, pretending to be embarrassed. Lately, I've really been thinking a lot about Miriam and not much else. This seemed to reassure them. After dinner, when Whitmore and Prudence went out into the backyard to get some air, I was helping Aldora clear the table. You know, Humphrey, she said, leaning across the table to me, I went through this with Sebastian. It's hard, but life goes on, and it's important to take care of the practical side of things beforehand. What do you mean, transferring assets to the children, for example? To avoid tax problems after the… You know. She patted my hand with fake sympathy. I'll think about it, I replied. When they finally left, I immediately checked the tapes. The camera in the study showed Whitmore methodically searching my safe, which was fortunately locked. The camera in the living room recorded Prudence coming down from Miriam's room and quickly examining the contents of the sideboard that held the antique set Miriam had gotten from her mother. And the tape recorder under the table recorded their conversation during lunch when I stepped out briefly to take Lorna's call. He's starting to suspect something, Whitmore said in a muffled voice. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get power of attorney. We need to move faster, Aldora replied. Prudence, did you check the pills upstairs? Yeah, the usual. Lots of medication for her, Prudence replied. But nothing that could be, you know, everything is strictly prescription and in precise doses. It's a shame, Aldora sighed. Sebastian was easier. He took a lot of his own medicine, and no one paid attention if the doses varied a little. Varied. I felt a chill go through me. Were they discussing hastening Miriam's death? This was beyond simple fraud. It was, scary to even think about. I checked the rest of the notes and found another interesting point. Prudence, while in Miriam's room, was quietly taking pictures on her phone of the documents I kept in the nightstand next to her bed, the health insurance and bank statements. That same evening, Garrett called. "Humphrey, I have some information," he said without preamble. "Your grandson is up to his eyeballs in debt. Gambling, mostly. He owes about $200,000 to some very unpleasant people, and the repayment period expires in 2 weeks." "I see," I replied, feeling the pieces of the puzzle coming together in my head. "What about a criminal record? Whitmore himself has a clean record, but his mother-in-law, Aldora Quinlan, interesting lady, her first husband died under suspicious circumstances 20 years ago. A case was opened, but no evidence was found, and her second husband, Sebastian, also died strangely. Officially from a heart attack, but some of the details are questionable. Are you sure you want to get involved with these people, Humphrey?" "I don't have a choice, Garrett. This is about Miriam's safety and our home. Then be careful, and watch your medicine and your food." After that conversation, I decided it was time to take more drastic measures. I copied all the recordings onto several flash drives. I left one at home in a safe deposit box, took one to a safe deposit box, and gave one to Garrett. Then I met with my lawyer and told him the whole situation with copies of the evidence. "Mr. Blackthorne," said the lawyer after reviewing the material, "you have every reason to take legal action, and possibly a criminal case. But I would advise you to proceed with caution. If your suspicions are correct, these men could be dangerous." "I understand," I replied, "but I won't let them take our house or hurt Miriam." "Then here's what we'll do." We devised a plan of action. I changed the will, making it clear that the house and most of the property would go to a charitable foundation to support historical research that I had secretly founded. I left a small portion to my daughter Idris, should she wish to reconnect. Nothing to Whitmore. I also installed additional cameras in the house, especially in Miriam's room, and hired a private nurse who was now on duty 24 hours a day. I locked all the medications in a safe, the key to which only I and the trusted nurse had. But most importantly, I had gathered all the evidence of their plans in one place, an old wooden box Miriam had once given me. It contained camera and tape recordings, photographs of documents, the results of Garrett's investigation, letters from the law firm, a forged power of attorney I'd managed to get through a lawyer, and even samples of Whitmore's handwriting to prove that he'd forged the signature. I hid the box in the basement behind some old bookshelves. I knew I'd need it soon. They were planning to lure me into a trap, but I was setting my own. And then Whitmore called and suggested we have a family dinner. "We need to discuss the future, Grandpa," he said with fake concern in his voice. I agreed. It was time for the final act of this messy play. The day of the family dinner was overcast. Heavy clouds hung over Grand Junction, promising rain in the evening. It seemed to me that even nature had geared up for the coming confrontation. I spent the morning helping Miriam prepare for the evening. She insisted on coming down for dinner, even though she had hardly gotten out of bed the last few days. "Humphrey, I want to be with you," she said in a weak voice when I tried to talk her out of it. "If this is a family dinner, I'm part of the family." I didn't argue. In 43 years of marriage, I'd learned to recognize that particular tone in her voice that meant the decision was final. Instead, I did my best to make her comfortable. I brought extra cushions for the chair, made her favorite light soup, made sure all her medications were on hand. A private nurse, Helen, helped Miriam bathe and dress. My wife had chosen her favorite dark blue dress, the same one we had worn on our 40th wedding anniversary. It hung on her now, emphasizing how thin she had become in the last few months. But in her eyes, I saw a glimmer of the determination that I'd always admired in her. "How do I look?" she asked as Helen finished fixing her thinning hair. "Fine," I answered, and it was true. Despite her illness, Miriam retained the inner dignity that had always made her beautiful in my eyes. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. The table was set for 6, for Miriam and me, Whitmore, Prudence, Aldora, and Helen, whom I insisted on including among the guests. "Miriam may need help during dinner," I explained, though the real reason was that I wanted a witness. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. They all came in together. Whitmore in an expensive suit that I knew from Garrett's investigation he couldn't afford. Prudence in a tight dress more suited for a cocktail party than a family dinner, and Aldora in an austere black ensemble, as if she were already preparing for a funeral. "Grandpa," Whitmore hugged me with fake enthusiasm. "How wonderful that we're all gathered." "Come in," I said, trying to make my voice sound normal. Miriam was already in the living room. When they saw Miriam in the chair, surprise flashed across their faces. Obviously, they hadn't expected her to join them for dinner. "Grandmother," Whitmore exclaimed, coming up to her. "How marvelous to see you downstairs. And you look beautiful." Miriam smiled weakly, but I noticed her tense up as he leaned over to kiss her cheek. "Thank you, Whitmore," she replied quietly. "I'm glad I could come down." Prudence and Aldora also came up to say hello, but their greetings were subdued. I noticed Aldora looking around the room appraisingly, her eyes lingering on the antique clock and silver candelabra that stood on the mantel. "Allow me to introduce Warning," I said, pointing to Helen. "This is Helen Ramsey, Miriam's private nurse." "Oh," Aldora barely concealed her displeasure. "I didn't realize we'd have outsiders." "Helen is part of our family," I replied firmly. "She takes care of Miriam around the clock." Of course," Aldora agreed hastily, but I saw her exchange quick glances with Prudence and Whitmore. We moved to the table. I helped Miriam to her usual place at the head of the table and sat down across from her. Whitmore and Prudence sat on one side of us, Aldora and Helen on the other. Dinner began relatively quietly. I served simple but exquisite dishes: asparagus cream soup, roasted chicken with herbs, fresh salad. A special portion of pureed soup and mashed potatoes was prepared for Miriam, the only thing she could eat now. The conversation at first revolved around safe topics: the weather, the latest city news, plans for the summer festival in Grand Junction, but I sensed it was the calm before the storm. Whitmore was drinking more than usual, and Prudence and Aldora were constantly exchanging glances, as if preparing for something. As we moved on to dessert, the apple pie I'd baked from Miriam's mother's recipe, Whitmore coughed and set his glass on the table with more force than necessary. "Grandfather, grandmother," he began, and I noticed a slight tremor in his voice. "I think we have something important to discuss." "What is it, Whitmore?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he was getting at. "The future." He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, circling the room. "Your future. The future of this house." Miriam tensed beside me. I covered her hand with mine, feeling her tremble. "Go on," I said in a neutral tone. "Prudence and I have been thinking a lot about this." Whitmore looked at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "And we thought it would be right for you to move into a good nursing home, where you'll be taken care of. Especially considering," he glanced at Miriam, "the circumstances." "What would happen to our home?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "Well, we thought we might move here," Prudence interjected, "so that the house would stay in the family. We'd pay you a good sum of money, of course, which you could use for medical treatment," Aldora added. Miriam squeezed my hand. I saw her knuckles turn white. "And when did you plan this move?" I asked, trying to keep my voice interested. Whitmore, obviously encouraged that I hadn't dismissed the idea outright, stepped forward. "Well, the sooner the better, I guess. Maybe next month." "We found a great place at Woodlands Retirement Home. They have a special palliative care unit." "I see," I nodded. "And how much are you willing to pay for the house?" "We were thinking $250,000, Prudence answered quickly. "That's a very generous offer, considering how much it would cost to renovate." I could barely contain my laughter. The house was worth at least twice that much, even at a conservative estimate. "What did Miriam think?" I asked, turning to my wife. "It's her house, too." Before Miriam could answer, Aldora intervened. "Humphrey, we all realize that Miriam will soon be unable to speak her mind. We're just trying to take care of the practicalities in advance. With my grandmother gone, this house is mine now," Whitmore blurted out, clearly irritated by my evasive answers and fueled by alcohol. "We've already decided everything." There was silence in the room. Miriam flinched as if struck by a blow. Prudence and Aldora exchanged quick glances, but I could see the satisfied smiles on their faces. They were obviously pleased that the cards were finally laid bare. "Whitmore!" Prudence tried to shush him, but without much enthusiasm. "What?" he snapped. "Everyone knows it. Grandmother's a goner, and grandfather can't do it alone. This house is too valuable to let it just sit there gathering dust." I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, but I held it back. This is not the time for emotions. I had to act coolly. "I understand," I said calmly, getting up from the table. "Wait here a minute. I want to show you something." I left the room and headed for the basement where my box of evidence was hidden. When I returned, Whitmore, Prudence, and Aldora had a mixture of confusion and impatience on their faces. "What's this?" Whitmore asked, pointing to the old wooden box in my hands. "This, Whitmore," I replied, placing the box on the table, "is the result of my own little investigation." I opened the lid and began to lay out the contents. First, the photographs of the documents they were trying to forge. "Here's a copy of the forged power of attorney you tried to execute in my name," I said, looking directly at Whitmore. Dash, dash. "I got it through my attorney from the law firm of Price & Associates. Interestingly, they were very surprised to learn that I had never signed such a document." Whitmore's face turned pale. "I don't know what you mean. And here are the printouts from your bank account," I continued, laying out the next document. $200,000 in gambling debts. The repayment deadline expires in a week. I wonder where the money from the sale of the house would go." "How did you—" Whitmore started, but I didn't let him finish. "And here are the results of a little research on Sebastian Quinlan's death." I looked at Aldora, who was stone-faced. "Interesting coincidences in the change of will shortly before his death and the sudden deterioration of his health." "This is slander," Aldora hissed. "I'll sue you." "Please," I nodded. "I'm sure the court will be interested in hearing these tapes too." I took the recorder out of the box and pressed the play button. In the silence of the room, Whitmore's voice sounded clearly. "After my grandmother dies, everything will be ours, I swear." Then Aldora's voice. "Sebastian was easier. He took a bunch of meds on his own, and no one paid any attention if the doses varied a bit varied." I turned off the tape and looked at their faces. Whitmore was pale as chalk. Prudence was fidgeting nervously with her napkin. Aldora sat motionless, her eyes darting from me to the exit, as if she were assessing her chances of escape. "That's not all," I continued, pulling out a flash drive. "Here are the tapes from the cameras installed in the house. You're on them searching my office, checking the safe, photographing documents from Miriam's nightstand. Very interesting family video, don't you think?" "You can't do that," Whitmore whispered. "It's illegal to record people without their consent. In my own house? After you tried to steal it from me and possibly hurt Miriam?" I shook my head. "I think the courts will be on my side." "What do you want?" Aldora asked, her voice as cold as ice. "Money? We don't have any." "I know," I answered. "I want you to leave us alone. Forever." "Or what?" Whitmore asked defiantly, though the fear in his eyes contradicted the tone. "Or this evidence will go to the police." I looked at Aldora. "I'm sure they'd be happy to reopen the case of Sebastian Quinlan's death. And you, Whitmore, can explain to your creditors why you won't be able to repay the money." I hear they're not very patient." There was silence. I could see them mentally calculating their options and realizing they'd lost. "We just wanted to help," Prudence said at last, trying to keep her dignity. "You've got it all wrong. I got it exactly right," I replied. "Now I want you out of my house and never come back. You can't just kick us out." Whitmore was outraged. "We're family." "Family doesn't try to steal from each other," Miriam said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her, as if oblivious to her presence. "Family doesn't wait for me to die to take our house. Family doesn't speak of us as a nuisance. You're not family, Whitmore. You are worse than strangers." Her words, spoken in a weak but firm voice, seemed to finally break the resistance. Whitmore opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find the words to object. "You have 5 minutes to leave," I said, "or I'm calling the police right now. And believe me, I have every reason to make a statement." They rose from the table as if on cue. Aldora kept her expression stony, Prudence nervously adjusting her dress, Whitmore staring at the floor, avoiding my gaze. "This isn't over," Aldora said, heading for the exit. "We'll come back to this conversation." No, you won't, I replied, following them to the door. Because my lawyer and the private investigator already have copies of all this evidence. And if anything happens to us or our property, they'll go straight to the police and the IRS. By the way, I checked. You didn't pay taxes on the sale of Sebastian's assets, Aldor. The IRS will be very interested in that information. It was a bluff. I didn't check her tax records. But judging by the way Aldora's face trembled, I'd hit the mark. They left the house in silence. Only Whitmore turned around as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind under my gaze. When the door closed behind them, I returned to the dining room. Miriam was leaning back in her chair, pale and exhausted, but I saw a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. You planned it all, she said, looking at me with a slight smile. All along you knew what they were up to. Sorry. Yes, I sat down next to her and took her hand. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't want to worry you. My clever Humphrey, she squeezed my hand weakly. I always knew they were up to something. I saw the way they looked at the house, at our things, but I didn't think they'd go this far. It's over now, I said. They won't bother us again. Helen, who had been watching the whole scene in silence, came up to Miriam. Mrs. Blackthorne, you must rest. This has been too tiring an evening. Miriam nodded. Yes, I suppose so. But I'm glad I was here. I'm glad I saw their real faces. And I'm glad my husband was smarter than all of them put together. I helped Helen take Miriam upstairs. As we put her to bed, I saw that, though tired, she looked calmer than she had in weeks. Humphrey, she called to me as Helen left the room. What now? Now we live the rest of our time the way we want to, I answered, sitting down beside her. Without them, without their schemes and intrigues, just you and me. As always, she smiled and closed her eyes, the way it always was. The morning after the family dinner was unexpectedly sunny. Rays of light filtered through the curtains into the bedroom, where Miriam was still asleep. I got up carefully, trying not to wake her. The last night had taken its toll. Her breathing was even, her face calm. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, she slept without anxiety. Going down to the kitchen, I found Helen already preparing breakfast. She nodded at me with an understanding smile. Good morning, Mr. Blackthorne. How are you feeling after yesterday? Strange, I answered honestly. It was like I'd lost a heavy weight, but I'd gained a new one. Helen nodded understandingly, cracking eggs into the pan. Family conflicts are always hard, especially when it comes to such serious allegations. I poured myself some coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. Yesterday's confrontation played over and over in my head. The shocked faces of Whitmore, Prudence, and Aldora as I laid the evidence of their machinations on the table. It was almost satisfying, but I felt no joy. Only bitterness that kindred people could plot such a thing. My musings were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. Whitmore's name popped up on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Good morning, Whitmore. Grandpa, his voice sounded strangely subdued, almost resigned. We need to talk. About yesterday. I thought we'd discussed it all by now. Please, he sounded desperate. Can I come? Alone without Prudence and her mother, just to talk. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just hang up and forget about this branch of the family forever. But the other part, the part that still remembered the little boy I'd once taught to ride a bike, couldn't turn away completely. Okay, I finally said. You can come at 10, but be warned, my position hasn't changed. Thank you, Grandpa. I'll be there. I hung up the phone and looked at Helen, who pretended not to be listening, but had obviously heard everything. Are you sure this is a good idea, Mr. Blackthorne? She asked cautiously. No, but I want to hear what he has to say. Besides, I smiled faintly, I have a witness. You wouldn't leave me alone with him, would you? Of course not, Helen said firmly. I'll be with him. At 10 o'clock, 1 minute to the minute, the doorbell rang. Helen opened it and Whitmore came in. He looked terrible, wrinkled, unshaven, red-eyed, as if he'd been up all night. It wasn't like his usual glossy appearance. Come in, I said, pointing to the living room. Miriam's resting now, so we won't disturb her. Whitmore nodded and walked into the room, sinking into a chair with a look of utter defeat. Helen stealthily took up a position by the door, ready to intervene if necessary. Grandfather, Whitmore began after a long pause. I've come to apologize. What I said yesterday, what we had planned, it's unforgivable. Yes, unforgivable, I agreed, not about to make it easy for him. You have to understand, he continued, looking up at me. I'm in really serious trouble. These debts, the people I owe, they're not the kind of people who just wait. They threatened me, threatened Prudence. And that's why you decided to steal our house? I asked bluntly. Whitmore lowered his head. I was confused. After I met Prudence, everything went downhill. She and her mother, they're very persuasive. Make you believe their plan is the only way. Don't pass the buck, I said sternly. You're a grown man, Whitmore. You made your own decisions. I know, he sighed. Sachten. But when Aldora suggested the plan with the house, it seemed almost legal. She said you wouldn't be able to live here anytime soon anyway, that it would just hasten the inevitable. And forging my signature, plans to declare me incompetent, talking about how to hasten Miriam's death? Did that seem almost legal too? Whitmore turned pale. I never meant to hurt my grandmother, I swear. Those were Aldora's words, not mine. But you listened to them, and you didn't mind. He didn't answer, just sat with his head down. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Helen looked at me questioningly, and I nodded, giving her permission to open it. To my surprise, Prudence stood in the doorway, alone without her mother. She looked almost as haggard as Whitmore. Mr. Blackthorne, she began as Helen let her in. I owe you an explanation. Prudence? Whitmore looked surprised. You said you weren't coming. I've changed my mind, she replied sharply, walking into the living room. Some things need to be cleared up. She sat down next to Whitmore, but she kept her distance, as if she didn't want to be seen as a couple. Mr. Blackthorne, she began again. I know what you think of me, and about my mother, but you must know the truth. What truth, Prudence? I asked, crossing my arms across my chest. Somo, it was all my mother's idea, she blurted out. The plan with the house, the declaring you incompetent, everything. She's experienced in this sort of thing. Prudence, Whitmore exclaimed. You can't just blame your mother for everything. Why not? She snapped at him. It's true, she did the same thing to my father, and to my stepfather. And now she was planning to do it to Humphrey's grandfather. And you were just a pawn in her game, Whitmore. We both were. I watched this scene with growing understanding. They were trying to save their own hides by blaming it on Aldora, classic tactic of finding a scapegoat. And you, of course, were completely unaware of her plans? I asked Prudence with undisguised sarcasm. Yeah, she stammered. I knew about some things, but not all of them. I swear, I never thought she'd go this far, especially with all the talk about, speeding things up. But you heard that talk and didn't stop her, I pointed out. Prudence lowered her eyes. I was afraid of her. You don't know my mother. She's capable of a lot of things when it comes to money. At that moment, the doorbell rang again. We all exchanged glances. It seemed today was the day for surprise visits. Helen went to open it again, and a moment later, Aldora entered the room. Her appearance made Whitmore and Prudence squirm in their chairs. I knew I'd find you here, she said coldly, giving them a scornful look. Traitors. Aldora, I stood up to greet her. What an unexpected visit. Don't play games with me, Humphrey, she cut me off. I've come to clear the air. And just in time, I see, before those two talk too much. She remained standing, refusing the offered seat. Her whole posture was defiant and confident. Humphrey, what happened yesterday was a simple misunderstanding. Yes, we discussed moving you, but only out of concern for you and Miriam. And those notes. She waved her hand as if to dismiss my evidence. They're taken out of context. Any good lawyer would take them apart in court. In what context could the phrase, after Grandma dies, everything will be ours, sound innocent? I asked calmly. It was an emotional moment. Whitmore was upset. He didn't mean it. Aldora threw a warning glance at her grandson, who opened his mouth but closed it immediately. And as for what I said about Sebastian, that was just an unfortunate comparison. His death was natural, from a heart attack, which happened just in time, right after the will was changed, I said. That's slander, Aldora said coldly. And I can sue you for spreading false accusations. Go ahead, I shrugged. I have all the evidence I need. And I'm sure the police would be very interested in reinvestigating Sebastian's death. For the first time, I saw a crack in her cold mask. Aldora's eyes widened with fear for a moment before she pulled herself together. You're bluffing, she said, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. Check it out, I smiled. I've already given copies of all the materials to my lawyer and detective. If anything happens to me or Miriam, they'll go to the police immediately. Aldora looked at me appraisingly, as if trying to determine if I was telling the truth. Then she shifted her gaze to Whitmore and Prudence. And you two? Come to bargain your way out of this by blaming it on me? Out of mother, Prudence began, but Aldora interrupted her. Shut up. I've done everything for you. Everything. And you would betray me at the first sign of trouble. You used us, Whitmore said quietly. All this time you've been using us for your own agenda. Oh, don't play the innocent lamb, Whitmore, Aldora said wryly. You were quite happy with the plan when you thought you'd get the money to pay your gambling debts. Only when it all went wrong did you suddenly become so principled. I watched their squabble, feeling strangely detached. It was as if they'd forgotten I was there, immersed in their mutual accusations. That's enough, I said at last, interrupting them. I'm not interested in your quarrels. All I'm interested in is that you all leave Miriam and me alone. What about our debts? Whitmore asked. These people don't joke, grandfather. They've already threatened us. That's your problem, Whitmore, I said firmly. I'm not going to sell the house or give you money to save you from the consequences of your own actions. Then we can go to the police, Prudence suddenly said. Tell them that you've been illegally recording us. That's an invasion of privacy. You can try, I shrugged. But keep in mind that then all your plans will be public too, including forging documents and discussing the possible accelerating Miriam's death. I think the police would be more interested in that than in my notes. Prudence turned pale and backed away. I thought you had always been so harmless, Whitmore said suddenly, looking at me with a new expression. A quiet professor who lived in a world of books. And you turned out to be smarter than you thought. I finished for him. Yes, it's a common mistake. People assume that softness of character means weakness of mind or will. It doesn't. What are you going to do with the records? Aldora asked, her voice sounding less confident. Nothing yet, I answered. They'll stay with my lawyer's insurance. If you leave us alone, they'll never see the light of day. If you try to harm us or our property again, they'll go straight to the police. That's blackmail, Aldora hissed. No, it's self-defense, I replied calmly. You were trying to steal our house and possibly hurt Miriam. I'm just protecting my family. What about us? Whitmore asked. Aren't we your family? The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, the man I'd once thought of as an extension of our bloodline, our blood. But now all I saw in him was greed and weakness. Family doesn't try to steal from each other, Whitmore. I repeated Miriam's words. A family doesn't wait for loved ones to die to inherit. You gave up the right to be called our family when you started this intrigue. There was silence. Whitmore lowered his head. Prudence fidgeted nervously with the sleeve of her dress. Aldora stood stone-faced, but her eyes showed defeat. I want you to leave, I said firmly, all of you, and don't come back. And if we refuse? Aldora asked defiantly. Then I'll call the police. I pulled out my cell phone. And I'll give them all the tapes, right now. It wasn't an empty threat, and they knew it. Aldora was the first to move toward the exit. Let's go, she said over her shoulder. There's nothing more for us to do here. Prudence followed obediently. Whitmore lingered, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite make out, a mixture of anger, fear, and perhaps regret. Grandfather, he began, but I shook my head. Go away, Whitmore. Just go. He stood for a second, then turned and walked out, followed by his wife and mother-in-law. I heard the front door slam, then the sound of a car pulling away. Helen, who had been standing silently by the door the whole time, came over to me. Are you all right, Mr. Blackthorne? Yes, I answered, though I felt a strange emptiness inside. I'm all right. They might come back, she warned me. People like that don't just give up. I know, I nodded. But I'm ready for them now, and I have proof. I went upstairs to check on Miriam. She was awake and sitting up in bed, leaning back against the pillows. Her pale face showed a question. They came, I said, sitting down next to her. All three of them, separately. What did they want? She asked quietly. Justify themselves, blame each other, convince me that I'd gotten it all wrong. Miriam smiled weakly. And you didn't believe them? Of course not, I took her hand. I told them never to come back, that my lawyer had all the evidence, and if they tried to hurt us, that evidence would go to the police. Are you sure they won't come back? I could hear the worry in her voice. No, I answered honestly. Sorry, but we're ready for them now, and I won't let them hurt you or take our home. Not ever. Miriam squeezed my hand. I know, she whispered. I always knew you would protect us. Even when you seemed so soft and compliant, I saw that inner strength in you. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. Rest, I said. I'll be right beside you. When I got downstairs, I called my lawyer and told him about the family visit. He advised me to get a restraining order to stop them from coming near our house. It was a good idea, and I agreed. I then called Garrett and asked him to install an additional security system in the house. Security cameras, alarms, everything. He promised to take care of it immediately. In the evening, sitting in my office, watching the sunset through the window, I reflected on the events of the past few days. It was bitter to realize that people related by blood could have plotted such things. But at the same time, I felt a strange liberation. The mask had been torn away, the truth had come out. And now Miriam and I could spend the time we had left together without fear of intrigue or manipulation. I didn't know if Whitmore, Prudence, and Aldora would return with new plans, but I was ready for them. No longer would they take me by surprise. No longer would they see me as weak and defenseless. I would protect Miriam and our home, at all costs. The week after the revelation passed in a strange, tense calm. Whitmore, Prudence, and Aldora never appeared again, but their presence felt like a shadow hanging over the house. I kept checking the locked doors, watching the cars go by, flinching at every unexpected ringing of the phone. Garrett had installed a new security system, cameras around the perimeter, an alarm system with a direct connection to the police station, even motion sensors in the garden. It all gave some peace of mind, but it couldn't completely eliminate the anxiety. Miriam was getting worse. Every day I saw her fading away, slowly but inexorably. Helen was now in the house 24 hours a day, and another nurse, Agatha, came with her so that they could take turns. The doctors increased the dose of morphine, and most of the time Miriam dozed, immersed in a hazy, half-sleeping world without pain. On one such day, as Miriam slept under the influence of the medication, I sat by her bedside holding her limp hand. It was raining lightly outside the window, droplets dripping down the glass, creating fanciful patterns. I watched them, immersed in my memories. How many years had I lived in the shadows? Always the quiet history professor, the bookworm as my colleagues called me, a man from whom no decisive action or bold deeds were expected. Even the students saw me as more of a good-natured crank than a real mentor. I was rarely asked for my opinion at faculty meetings, and if I spoke up, I was listened to with polite impatience, waiting for someone more authoritative to speak. It was only Miriam who always saw more in me. From the very beginning, from the first time we met at a college literary event, she looked at me as if she saw right through me, not only what I was, but what I could become. She never thought of me as weak or insignificant. To her, I had always been a rock, a pillar, a person to lean on. I remembered our first date. Miriam was in the art department. I was teaching history. She approached me after an open lecture on ancient Greek sculptures and invited me to a cafe, breaking all the social norms of the time. You have this way of looking at history, as if you see the souls of the people behind these works, she said at the time. And I, usually lost in the presence of beautiful women, somehow felt at ease with her. 3 months later, I proposed to her under an old oak tree in the city park. I didn't have a ring. My graduate school stipend barely covered my daily expenses. Instead of a ring, I gave her an ancient coin found during an archaeological dig in Greece. It reminds me of eternity, I said then, and how some things can survive the ages without losing their value. Like my love for you. Trite, corny words, but Miriam liked them. She wore that coin on a chain until I could buy her a real ring. Our lives were never particularly colorful or eventful. We both preferred quiet evenings with books to noisy parties, long walks in the park to social gatherings. But in this measured life, we found our own depth and beauty. Miriam painted, watercolors, oils, pastels. Her works were never exhibited in famous galleries but had their connoisseurs among the locals. I wrote articles for historical journals, taught, and sometimes gave lectures to the public. We were happy in our own little world. The birth of Idris was a real miracle for us. Doctors warned that Miriam might have trouble conceiving due to complications from a youthful illness. But after 5 years of marriage, she became pregnant, and 9 months later, our daughter was born, a tiny creature with a mop of dark hair and a serious look that didn't match her tiny face. Idris grew up to be a clever, willful girl. As a child, she adored me, following me like a shadow, absorbing my stories about the history of ancient civilizations. I remember how at the age of 7, she drew her own version of the Parthenon for a school project, based on my descriptions. The teacher was impressed by the detail of the drawing, not realizing that behind it were hours of my father's passionate storytelling. But with the onset of adolescence, everything changed. Idris became distant, finding me boring, old-fashioned, too correct. She gravitated toward brighter, more forceful personalities. Like Brandon Pierce, her first true love and future husband, Whitmore's father. Brandon was the complete opposite of me, loud, confident, with an opinion on every subject that he wasn't shy about expressing. He worked in the construction business, made good money, and didn't hide his disdain for book smarts like me. When Idris announced her pregnancy and impending marriage, it took all my self-control to express joy rather than apprehension. Their marriage had lasted 7 years. 7 years of gradual disappointment, which Idris carefully hid, but which I saw in her eyes at every visit. Brandon wasn't ready for the responsibilities of married life. He started drinking, then cheating. When Idris finally decided to divorce, he walked out, leaving her with little Whitmore and a pile of debt. Miriam and I offered our daughter to come home, but she refused. Pride wouldn't let her admit that her parents were right in their concerns about Brandon. Instead, she moved to Portland, where she got a job at an advertising agency. Gradually, our communication dwindled to occasional holiday phone calls and birthday cards. Whitmore, who was 9 at the time, stayed with his mother but spent every summer with us in Grand Junction. I loved those summer months. I loved showing my grandson museums and historic sites, telling him about the past in a way that made it come alive in his imagination. Whitmore was an inquisitive, intelligent boy with the same spark in his eyes that I had once seen in little Idris. I hoped that spark would not fade like his mother's, that he would find his way without repeating his parents' mistakes. It's a bitter irony that this inquisitive boy has grown into a man willing to betray us for money, that the grandson, whom I taught to value history and tradition, did not hesitate to cross family ties when it came to material gain. Miriam moved weakly in her sleep, bringing me back to the present. I adjusted the blanket and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Even now, exhausted by illness, she remained beautiful to me. How many times in our life together had she supported me, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself? How many times did her quiet confidence give me the strength to carry on when I wanted to give up? She was my compass, my anchor, my guiding star. And now that that light was fading, I felt like a ship lost on a dark sea. But isn't that the essence of love, to carry a part of another person in you even when they're not around? Miriam always saw in me a strength I didn't realize I had. She believed that under the mask of a quiet professor hides a man capable of decisive actions. Recent events have shown that she was right. I will no longer be the inconspicuous Humphrey that everyone used to underestimate. For Miriam's sake, for the sake of our love, I would become the man she had always seen me to be. The first order of business was to provide Miriam with the best possible care for the remainder of her time. I contacted the leading palliative care specialist with no regard for costs. The money we had been saving all these years for a rainy day was now finding its use. Dr. Rachel Stone, recommended as one of the best specialists in the state, agreed to monitor Miriam at home, coordinating nurses and ensuring maximum comfort. I also redecorated our bedroom, creating a distinctive oasis of calm and beauty for Miriam. I ordered a special medical bed that could be adjusted for maximum comfort. I installed a large TV across the hall so she could watch her favorite movies and travel documentaries. Placed her own paintings on the walls, the ones she especially loved but never put up for sale, deeming them too personal. In the corner of the room, I put a humidifier with lavender essential oils, a scent Miriam always found soothing. Every day I read aloud to her, classic novels, contemporary prose, sometimes poetry. In moments of enlightenment, when the pain receded and consciousness cleared, we talked about the past, about happy times, about what was important to both of us. Never about the future. We both knew her future was measured in weeks, months at best. But in those brief moments of intimacy, it was as if time stopped, and we were once again a young couple sitting under an oak tree in the park, with a lifetime ahead of us. But there was one more thing I had to do, a thing I had been putting off for far too long. One evening, as Miriam slept soundly after taking her medication, I sat down at my computer and opened my email inbox. For a few minutes, I stared at the empty field for a new email, not knowing where to begin. How to address a daughter I hadn't really spoken to in almost 10 years. What to say to her after such a long silence. Finally, I began to type. Dear Idris, it has been a long time since we have truly spoken. Perhaps too long. I'm writing to you now because events have happened that you should know about. Your mother is gravely ill. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say she has a few months left, perhaps less. She's braving the disease, but she's getting weaker by the day. There's another reason I'm writing. It is about your son, Whitmore, his wife, Prudence, and her mother, Aldora. I detailed everything that had happened over the past weeks. Whitmore and his family's plans for our home, their manipulations, the conversations they'd overheard, the evidence I'd gathered, and the final confrontation over dinner. I tried to be objective, not to thicken the colors, but not to hide the unpleasant truth either. I'm not writing this to turn you against your son. He's a grown man and is responsible for his own actions. But you need to know what's going on. And another thing, your mother would want to see you before it's too late. I know there's a lot of unspoken things between us. I know we've both made mistakes, but this is no time for old grudges. Life is too short for that, Idris. Your mother always loved you, even when you weren't in touch. And so have I. Love, your father. I reread the letter a few times, making minor edits before hitting send, then leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. I had done what I should have done long ago. The decision was now up to Idris. The next few days passed in anxious anticipation. I checked my email every hour, flinched at every ringing of the phone, but there was no answer. Perhaps Idris had changed her email address, or read it and decided not to reply. Or worst of all, Whitmore had already contacted her and presented his version of events, which made me look like a cruel old man who'd kicked his grandson out of the house for no reason. On the 4th day after sending the letter, when I had just about given up hope, the phone rang around 9 o'clock in the evening, an unfamiliar number with a Portland area code. I answered with a pounding heart. Hello? Dad? Idris's voice lower and deeper, but still recognizable. It's me. Idris, I couldn't help the tremor in my voice. It's so good to hear you. There was a pause during which I heard only her breathing. I got your letter, she said at last. About Mom. Is it true? Is she really that bad? Yes, I answered quietly. The doctors say she has no more than 3 months to live. She made a sound that sounded like a restrained sob. And Whitmore? Did he really try to take your house? I'm afraid so. I have proof. Tapes of conversations, documents. I can forward it to you if you want. No, she answered quickly. I believe you. It's just, this is so unlike the Whitmore I know. He's always been so right. People change, I said, especially when you're around people who can manipulate. I think his wife and her mother had a lot of influence on him. Prudence, Idris's voice had a hard edge to it. I always felt there was something wrong with her. Too perfect, too right. But Whitmore was so in love, he wouldn't listen to my warnings. We were silent for a moment, each absorbed in his own thoughts. Dad, Idris said at last, I'll be there. I took a vacation at work, and I've already booked a plane ticket. I'll be there tomorrow night if you don't mind. Of course I don't mind, I answered hastily. We'll be very happy, especially your mom. Does she know I'm coming? No, I didn't want to give her false hope until I was sure. I understand, Idris said quietly. I'll call you when I land. And Dad, yes. Thanks for writing. I know it wasn't easy after all these years. It's never too late for a family to start over, I said, putting all the sincerity I could into those words. I sat in the chair for a long time after the conversation, staring at the phone in my hand. Idris is coming. My daughter is coming home after so many years of estrangement. There was a ray of light in this story, full of bitterness and disappointment, an opportunity to repair broken family ties before it was too late. I went upstairs to the bedroom where Miriam slept under the influence of the medication. Her face seemed peaceful, almost serene in the dim nightlight. I sat down gingerly on the edge of the bed and took her hand. Miriam, I whispered, knowing she couldn't hear, but still feeling the need to say it out loud. Idris is coming back, our daughter's coming home, and I thought she smiled slightly in her sleep. The snow fell silently on a fresh mound of white roses. I stood leaning on my cane, a new acquisition, the result of a small fall in the ice a month ago. A bronze plaque on a simple granite stone read, Miriam Blackthorne, beloved wife and mother. Below that were the dates of her life and a simple epitaph. Her light will remain with us forever. It had been 3 months since Miriam had left this world. 3 months, 18 days, and approximately 14 hours. I couldn't help but keep that silent count. The doctor said she didn't have more than a month left, but Miriam had always been a fighter. She lasted almost 4. After Idris arrived, something had changed. It was as if her daughter's presence had energized Miriam. They spent long hours together, reconnecting, making up for years of estrangement. Sometimes I joined them, but more often I left them alone, realizing that they needed this time to themselves. Idris talked about her life in Portland, about her work at the advertising agency where she'd risen to creative director, about her relationships that hadn't worked out, about the friends who'd replaced her family. Miriam listened with rapt attention, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just holding her daughter's hand, as if afraid she would disappear again. I remember Miriam's last day with piercing clarity. It was a warm October evening, unusually mild for this time of year. She had been feeling better all day, hardly needing any pain medication, even able to eat some soup at dinner. The 3 of us sat in her room, Miriam on the bed, supported by pillows, Idris and I in chairs nearby. We talked about simple things. The weather, the book I'd recently read to Miriam, the movie that had been on TV the previous evening. Ordinary family conversation, the kind that happens in millions of homes every day. But for us, it was precious in its normalcy. The illusion that all was well, that we were just a family spending the evening together. When Idris went out to make tea, Miriam suddenly took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was surprisingly firm. Sananum, Humphrey, she said quietly but clearly. You must move on. After me. Promise me. I started to deny it, to say that she would get better, that we'd spend a lot more time together. But she just shook her head with that special smile that always meant, don't argue with me, you know I'm right. Promise, she repeated. Promise me you won't just exist, that you'll find a new purpose, a new joy, that you'll let yourself be happy. I promise, I said, feeling the tears come to my eyes. And I'm sorry, Whitmore, she added. Not now, but someday. He made a terrible mistake, but he's still our grandson, your blood. I didn't answer, not wanting to argue with her at a time like this. But in my heart, I knew it was a promise I would have a hard time keeping. Idris returned with tea, and the conversation turned to other topics. Soon Miriam grew tired, and we left her to rest. In the morning, when I brought her breakfast, she was no longer breathing, gone in her sleep, without pain, without agony. The kind of death one can only dream of after a long illness. The funeral was modest, just as Miriam wanted. Just close friends, college colleagues, a few former students who had kept in touch with me over the years. Idris was by my side, silent and pale, holding my hand. Whitmore did not come, though I, following Miriam's last will, had sent him an invitation. Instead, he sent a formal condolence card, as if he were a distant acquaintance rather than a grandson. After the funeral came empty, colorless days. I walked around the house like a ghost, aimlessly going through Miriam's things, rereading old letters, looking at photographs. Idris stayed with me for 2 weeks, but then she had to return to Portland. Her work required her presence. She offered to go with her, but I wasn't ready to leave the house where I still felt Miriam's presence. But gradually the emptiness of the house became a burden rather than a comfort. Too many memories, too many ghosts of the past. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf screamed Miriam's absence. And then one morning I woke up with a clear realization. I couldn't stay here. This was our home, Humphrey and Miriam's home. Without her, it had become a museum, a monument to what was irrevocably gone. I called the realtor the same day, explained the situation, said I wanted to sell the house as soon as possible. She suggested waiting until spring. The market would be better. Prices would be higher. But I refused. I didn't care about money. I wanted to start a new chapter of my life, and I needed to do it now, as long as I had the determination. The house went quickly, an old mansion in a prestigious neighborhood, well preserved, with history. The buyers were a young couple with 2 children who had moved to Grand Junction from Denver. They fell in love with the house at first sight, especially appreciating the spacious garden where the kids could play. Looking at them, I felt a strange contentment. The house that had witnessed Miriam and I fall in love would now be home to a new family, new memories, new happiness. It remained to be decided where to go next. Idris again suggested I move to Portland, but I declined. Despite the restored relationship, I wasn't ready for that kind of dependency. In my 65, I still needed autonomy, my own space. Instead, I found a small but cozy apartment in downtown Grand Junction. 2 floors of the historic building had been converted into modern apartments while retaining the charm of the early 20th century. High ceilings, large windows, wood floors. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the city park. Not a mansion, of course, but enough room for one person and his books. The process of packing and sorting things proved both painful and therapeutic at the same time. Each item evoked memories, some happy, some sad. I decided to take with me only the most necessary and personal things. Books, of course, some pieces of furniture to which I was particularly attached, photos, documents. The rest I donated to charitable organizations or gave to friends. Miriam's personal belongings I carefully packed in separate boxes. Clothes for charity, jewelry and memorabilia for Idris, art supplies for the local art school. Miriam would approve of this distribution. The move coincided with the receipt of a letter from a lawyer. Whitmore had filed a lawsuit challenging the sale of the house. He claimed I was acting under the influence of stress after my wife's death and was not in my right mind when deciding to sell. He demanded that the sale be invalidated and that the house be returned to family ownership, implying, obviously, that he himself was the heir. I expected something like this. My lawyer assured me that the claim had no chance of success. I had all the medical reports confirming my legal capacity, all the documents were in order, the transaction was legal. Moreover, given the evidence I had gathered of Whitmore's previous frauds, any judge would be highly skeptical of his claims. And that's just the way it turned out. The case didn't even make it to a full trial. After a preliminary hearing where evidence was presented of Whitmore's attempts to gain control of my estate while Miriam was still alive, the judge dismissed the claim as frivolous and potentially fraudulent. Whitmore was also warned of the possibility of a countersuit on my part if he continued such actions. I did not countersue, not out of pity for Whitmore, but out of a reluctance to prolong this sordid affair. I wanted to move on, put the past behind me, and maybe somewhere deep inside I remembered Miriam's last plea for forgiveness. Settling into the new place took a few weeks. The apartment was smaller than the house, and I had to learn to live in a more compact space. But gradually I got used to it. I created a cozy office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, set up a small but functional kitchen where I could cook simple meals for myself. In the living room, I put the piano that Miriam sometimes played, the only large piece of furniture I couldn't keep. Not that I could play, but sometimes I touched the keys, extracting random sounds, and it gave the illusion of her presence. Idris called every week, sometimes more often. Our relationship, though restored, was still fragile, requiring constant attention and effort on both sides. We both bore the scars of past hurts, misunderstandings, years of estrangement, but now at least we were both willing to work on healing those wounds. One day during one of our phone conversations, Idris said something that made me think. "Daddy, have you ever thought about taking up painting?" she asked. "You've always admired Mom's work, always been interested in art. Maybe you should give it a try." I dismissed the idea, saying that at my age it was too late to start something new. But the thought lingered in my mind. Miriam had indeed often said that I had a sense of color and composition. She even tried to teach me the basics of painting, but I was always too busy working, researching, teaching, always finding reasons to put it off for later. And now the later was here. I had a lot of free time, no commitments except those I chose to make myself. Why not give it a try? The next day I signed up for a beginner's painting class at the local art center. The group turned out to be a diverse group, ranging from teenagers to retirees, some with obvious talent, others like me, just beginning their journey in art. The instructor was a young woman named Evelyn Bishop, energetic and inspiring. She didn't discount age or inexperience, demanding full commitment from all her students, but was able to find and emphasize even the most modest of accomplishments. My first painting was awful, a crooked still life with apples that looked more like red bowling balls. But Evelyn found in it an interesting play of light and an unconventional approach to composition. I didn't believe her, of course, but her encouragement gave me the motivation to keep going. Over time, I really began to improve. The proportions became more accurate, the colors more harmonious. I learned to see not just objects, but light and shadow, form and texture. Painting required being fully present in the moment, leaving no room for heavy thoughts and memories. When I stood in front of the easel, time disappeared, and there was only the canvas, the colors, and the image I was trying to embody. The course also gave me the opportunity to meet new people. I became especially close to Doreen McCarthy, a widow about my age who, like me, had begun painting after losing her husband. We often stayed after class to have coffee and discuss our work, gradually moving into conversations about life, books, and music. Doreen was an intelligent, witty woman with a wonderful sense of humor and a sharp tongue. She reminded me of Miriam in her directness and independence, but she was a completely different person. She was easy and comfortable to be with, without the need to pretend or look better than I was. Another source of new acquaintances was a book club organized by the local library. I had always loved to read, but I used to do it alone. Now, every 2 weeks, I would gather with a group of similarly enthusiastic people to discuss a book of my choice. The discussions were often lively, sometimes contentious, but always stimulating. The group ranged in age from college students to retirees, each bringing a unique perspective and experience to the discussion. So step by step, I was building a new life. A life without Miriam, but one that did not deny her existence, but rather grew out of it, like a new shoot from a strong root. I hadn't forgotten her, hadn't gotten over her death in the way people usually use that word. She remained a part of me, influencing my decisions, my view of the world. But I was learning to move on, to find new sources of joy and meaning. One Saturday afternoon, almost 6 months after Miriam's death, I received a letter from Idris. Not an electronic letter, but a real paper letter, a rarity these days. Inside were several pages written in her neat handwriting and a photograph. The picture showed Idris standing in front of a small house with a white fence, smiling at the camera. I didn't recognize the place, but I could tell from the look on her face that it held special meaning for her. In the letter, Idris talked about an important decision she had made. She had bought a house in a small town in the suburbs of Portland and planned to move there in the coming months. She wasn't quitting her job at an advertising agency, but had arranged for part-time remote work so she could spend more time in a more relaxed environment. She wrote that recent events, her mother's illness, the reunion with me, the Whitmore scandal, had made her reevaluate her priorities. She realized that the race for career success and the hustle and bustle of the city were no longer satisfying. At the end of the letter, she made a proposal that took me by surprise. She asked if I wanted to move in with her when her house was ready. Not permanently if I wasn't ready for such a move, but at least for the summer, to spend time together, to get to know each other better. The house has a guest cottage in the garden, she wrote. It's small but cozy with a separate entrance. You'll have as much privacy as you want, but we'll still be close. We can eat together, talk together, just be a family. I know it's a big ask, and I understand if you say no, but I'd like to try to make up for at least some of the time we've lost. I sat with the letter in my hands, not knowing what to think. Part of me wanted to agree immediately. The chance to rebuild a relationship with my daughter, to be there for her, maybe even be a support and encouragement to her like a father should. It was tempting. But the other part was hesitant. Is it too soon for such a step? Wouldn't we be disappointed to find that past hurts are not so easily forgotten? And was I ready to leave the new life I had just begun to build here in Grand Junction? I decided not to answer right away, to give myself time to think. And today, standing at Miriam's grave, I finally knew my answer. I'm going to Idris, Miriam, I said, looking at the snow-covered stone. For the summer, maybe longer. We'll see how things work out. The wind moved the branches of the nearby trees, creating the illusion of an answer. I miss you every day, I continued. But I'm trying to move on, like you asked. I have a new apartment now. You'd love it. Lots of light for painting. I've started painting myself, can you imagine? Not as good as you, of course, but I'm learning. I was quiet for a while, collecting my thoughts. You know, I've met some interesting people. Doreen from painting class. She reminds me of you, so straightforward. And the book club. You'd appreciate our discussions about Jane Austen. Yeah, I'm not alone, Miriam. Don't worry about me. The snow continued to fall, covering the ground in a white blanket. A silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant sound of passing cars. As for Whitmore, I sighed. He'd lost the trial, tried to take the house even after you died. I can't forgive him, not yet, but I remember what you asked. And maybe someday, if he changes, but not now. I fixed the bouquet of roses, brushed the snow off the top of the rock. I won't let anyone manipulate me anymore, Miriam. Not Whitmore or anyone else. I'm no longer the stealthy man everyone used to underestimate. You always saw more in me than I saw in myself. Now I'm starting to see it too. I stood for a while longer, just silent, feeling strangely peaceful. Then I leaned over and kissed the cold stone. I love you, Miriam, I always will. But I will move on, just as you wanted me to. I promise. Turning around, I walked slowly down the snow-covered path toward the cemetery exit. A new chapter of life was ahead of me. Uncertain, perhaps difficult, but my own, and I was ready for it.